This is when I realized, okay, I cannot dive and I don't know when I will be able to dive or if I will be able to dive because doctors were not very optimistic.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. When Maria Shagina decided to pursue this new hobby of enjoying moments beneath the surface of the water, she traveled down a non-traditional route and approached the sport with a more technical-driven mindset and practice. Making her way to Mexico would introduce her to the beautiful caves of the Yucatan. Instantly, she knew this is where she needed to be. Finding a welcoming community, she settled in and made a new home, until an injury in a dry caving expedition would change her life and alter her course. Eventually, she would overcome this and find her way back to this place she calls home. Please enjoy. Maria, how are you doing this wonderful afternoon or evening for you, correct?
It is evening here in Mexico. It's currently 6 p.m. Actually doing fine. I had a nice dive today and relaxing after a dive.
Awesome. So I know there's quite a big storm headed your way or about to hit your area. How is that all going right now?
As of right now, the sky is clear and everyone keep texting, like saying, oh, what about the hurricane? And we do have all those warnings, but actually nothing's going on so far. We expect it to hit maybe tomorrow afternoon. We'll see.
Well, that's good. I'm glad things are good there because I've been kind of watching it on the news and I've been seeing its path. I mean, I swear every year we're coming up with historical, never seen before storms. So hopefully it doesn't hit too hard over in that area. But my first question I wanted to ask you is, tell me how and why you became a scuba diver. Tell me what led to that moment, that first breath underwater. The what, the how, the why. Was it love at first breath? Was it, I absolutely hate this? Tell me all about it.
Actually, it was some sort of a mistake for the first time. It's quite a funny story. When I was 18, me and my brother, we planned our first ever trip to Europe. And back in the days, I needed a visa to go travel anywhere. So the Spanish consulate declined the visa for me, and we ended up flying to Egypt. And as we were in Egypt, I was like, okay, what are we gonna do? Snorkeling, fine. Red Sea, fine. And we tried the Discovery Scuba Diving program for the first time. And I have a twin brother, so we did it together as a team, and I completely fell in love with just like a pure sensation of being underwater. I saw one yellow fish, and I remember this fish to this day through the dive. Like, that was so amazing. But yeah, I guess I just liked the feeling of being under the water overall. But from that moment, it took me a while to actually take my first class and take my first step towards becoming a diver.
Okay, so where did you start training? Like, was it just because of logistical traveling type areas? Was there not diving in where you're from?
I'm from Ukraine, and in Ukraine, we used to have the Black Sea, which is quite deep and cold, a lot of wrecks, and like quarries, cold lakes. So all the conditions for technical diving, not so much for recreational diving. When I decided, okay, I now want to take a class, I did my research, and I don't have maybe like a very common path in diving, because when I did my research, it kind of occurred to me that the way a lot of people were diving back in the days, like in Egypt and other touristical destination, just didn't seem professional enough. Like, that was, in my view, very easy way to take diving. And I kind of like, okay, you are now under the water at like 18-meter depth. It's quite deep if you compare it to like a 9-story building. And you tell me that it's just like all fun and easy. It can't be so. So I found it, I don't know. I found a technical instructor who was also a GOE diver. And I took my first open water class, like in a back plate and long hose and jet fins, all the good stuff. And then I transitioned really, really fast to technical diving.
Oh, okay. Did you take a recreational one GUE course, or was it kind of like a DIR style open water?
Yeah, like a
Okay.
DRR style open water, and then I took as soon as I hit the minimal amount of dives, the requirement, I don't remember what was it, 40 maybe, I can't remember. I took my first technical class,
Oh,
the
wow.
advanced nitrox.
Okay. So yeah, you just jumped right in.
I know that's a bit unusual because when I talk to people, they usually go down the memory lanes of, oh, diving in the B cities and using all this gear. And I only ever owned and dove in a backplate and a wing. I never even tried a recreational B city.
How did you find the training? Was it some like did you take to it very easily when you first started going through the actual training? Was it easy? Was it difficult? How did you like it?
It was easy for me. Like it felt a bit challenging, but I didn't struggle with anything. So I did my confined water sessions in the swimming pool back in my city, and then I had to fly to Egypt for the open water part of it. And the instructor who actually just had to take this like 4 open water dives as an exam, he told me, wow, like your buoyancy is so bad. Like, well, it's my first dive in the open water. Like, no, you cannot dive like this, girl. You're never gonna be a good diver. Yeah, that was a bit discouraging. But then afterwards, I took an advanced open water class. That's a fun fact. My 10th dive ever, which was a deep dive in advanced open water class, was on Thistlegorm, and I had a stage bottle on me, like properly mounted.
That's definitely uh not the traditional advanced route that most people go through.
Yeah, I
That is
think so.
awesome. So after you took those two courses, it's at that point. I mean, I'm sure you knew at the beginning this is something that you wanted to pursue. So tell me about you did the open water, you did the advance, and then when did you kind of decide you wanted to start to progress towards becoming a professional?
Well, I did my advance, and then I had a trip to the Black Sea with my brother and like a group of technical divers. And there is one wreck which is called, like in Russian, it's Cesarevich, which means king, Alexei, which is like a famous wreck. And imagine this, this is like a perfect wooden ship that stays on the bottom of the ocean at 55-ish meters. And it looks like something like a ship in the bottle, like in a pristine condition with still some sails and some ropes. Very beautiful. But because I was just an advanced open water diver, I could only go down to like 40 meters and look at it from up, down. So this was the moment I was like, okay, all cool people here are diving doubles and doing a cool dive, actually going inside the shipwreck, and I am just here hanging. It just didn't feel right, so I straight switched to technical. Like next thing I did, I booked my technical class, and then maybe shortly after, that was 2012 or 13, I can't remember. I had a trip to Mexico. That's another, like how I came here. So I had vacations and I was like, okay, I'm cave certified. And I heard about caverns, but in my head, it was only available for cave certified divers. So I was diving on Cozumel and someone suggested me to try a cavern tour. It's like, isn't it just for cave divers? Like, no, you can do this as just a diver. And I finished my dive in Calavera, and I had a very cool guide, Leo. Shout out to Leo. And he asked me, like, did you like it? I'm like, yeah, I'm moving to Mexico. I'm becoming a cave diver and an instructor, and I'm living here. And he looked at me and he was like, what? Like, are you serious?
I
Yep.
mean, I understand catching that bug. I definitely, I have not moved to Mexico after I did it, but after I did my first cavern, I was hooked. And it's funny too, because I've told the story a couple times, but I lived in Texas for a long time, so Mexico's right there, right? So Cancun's like a 2 hour flight from Austin, Texas, and Cozumel just right there, and I we went down there for some diving, and I remember talking to my girlfriend, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't think I would ever become a cave diver." I'm like, "I think that's really cool, but it's just something that I would never do." But of course, go to Mexico, and I'm like, "Okay, let me book a cavern." And I didn't even know it was called a cavern. I just thought it was a cave or a cenote. I was like, "Oh, it's a cenote." Yeah, as soon as I got in there, I was like, "Holy shit, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And yeah, instantly caught the bug. But when you decided, like, I'm moving to Mexico, tell me about that process. Was that like an easy thing? Was it like an overnight thing? Did it take like a couple years before you were able to get back there?
Well, I came back. I had like a normal job back at the days, like a regular office stuff. But then I just devoted 1 year for my instructor development, and I had one passport, like filled with Egyptian visas, because my instructor trainer at the time he lived in Egypt, so I would like travel all of the time and spend all my 3 days there, diving and training. And then like I had a plan, but then with all the situation that happened in 2014 back in Ukraine, it kind of pushed me a little bit. So I thought to myself, okay, I might as well just move now. What I'm waiting for. So like I had the idea for a long time, but the decision itself and the moving process happened very fast, like within maybe 1 month. So I just left my country with like two cases filled with diving equipment, and that was it.
So you started training technical before you moved to Mexico. And then when you got to Mexico, is that when you started going down the professional route?
When I came to Mexico, I was already a recreational instructor and a technical diver. And then here I took my cave class and started to move forward, becoming a cave instructor, which had its like ups and downs. It's been quite a bumpy road.
Well, before I ask that question, the process of becoming a cave instructor, how did you find all the training to go into becoming a professional? Because I know, you do the regular training as far as like training to become a diver, and then when people start going into that professional side of it, it's definitely a little bit different. How did you take to all of that?
I just got lucky. It happened to be that my instructor at the time was also an instructor trainer for the INTD. So that was like a pretty straightforward path for me. But I would say just find either an agency you trust in or find an instructor trainer the same way you maybe find your instructor as a diver, and just go through the training with the person you trust. So yeah, I've been trained with INTD for the most part.
So bags are packed. You just landed in Mexico. Tell me about that.
I don't know how to express it. Like anyone who experienced immigration can relate probably. You first like super excited and then you get completely lost because you don't know. I didn't know Spanish and there is just so much to do. But the first thing I actually did within like first 2 weeks when I moved, I took my cave class because that was like a priority. I said to myself, you have to take a cave class and you have to start cave diving because you cannot take people places you don't know yourself. And alongside, I worked on developing like my own thing and clients, and I worked for myself for quite some time. I had someone like a partner I worked with for a while, but then we split our ways. But yeah, I took a cave class and I just started cave diving. And I remember vividly my first ever cave dive after the class was to the Battleship Room. That's a cave in Chakmol. It's not the most spectacular cave in the area, just to be clear. But back in the days, it was like me first time leading the cave dive on my own, and I found myself in this enormous giant room with like stalactites and stalagmites and halocline in the middle. For those of you who don't know, it's where the fresh and salt water meets, and it's quite a cool effect. And that completely blew my mind. I came back home, and my mom was in Mexico at the time, and I think I couldn't stop like talking about this for the next 3 hours. And she said eventually, like, chill, go to the beach, chill. I believe you. It was awesome.
As you know, I was recently in Mexico, and I just went through my training. I spent pretty much like 7-ish weeks down there, maybe a little shot, a little less, a little more. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it was absolutely amazing just being, able to only go in the cavern zone, and then did my intro to cave, and then full cave. It was just absolutely mind-blowing. And I remember at one point we were on a dive, and the halocline was so strong. I mean, you could just see just this layer when we were under it, and then when you would pop up, it was so surreal to me because my mind was just playing like an absolute trick on me. Because when we came up over the halocline, I mean, you have this like crazy visual like of the person, my guide, when she was going through the halocline, she was in front of me, and it looked like she was just like a superhero or something because she was going through the halocline and then just these streams were going over her, and I was just thinking like she's just like flying in the air. It was just such a surreal like moment. I was like, holy shit, this is so cool. But when we would pop up over the halocline, the water was so clear that my like visuals were like, I'm out of the water right now. Like I can see the water line, but
Right.
like and it threw me for a loop because in my, I mean, obviously I wasn't going to take my regulator out and start breathing, you know, but in my mind I was like, dude, I feel like I'm above the water line right now, but it's like, no, we're in the water right now.
That's the exact same feeling I have. Like sometimes when the holocline is untouched, so no one have passed through it, it's maybe early in the day or just, remote cave or passage. And you go and you're in the fresh water and you can see this like salt water moving underneath you. And it does feel like you're under the water twice. Like, okay, now I'm gonna dive into this next water level, but I'm already diving. It's a bit, it's interesting.
It
It's a cool
really
feeling.
really is. And another way that I described it too, because there's some points where the line is just below the halocline and you're just above the halocline. And I don't know if people have seen like when they show someone playing a guitar, but they showed the vibrations around the string of the guitar when they're plucking the guitar. And so like
Hmm.
at some points I would just kind of like not grab the line, but I would like pluck the line, and then you would just see the vibe, like the halocline and the visuals. It's so insane to me. Like it's still mind blowing. And if it's something that you haven't experienced out there, all of my 10 listeners, no, I think I hopefully have more than 10 listeners. But it's an absolutely mind blowing visual crazy effect that everybody should try at some point in time. But sorry, back to your story. So when
Yeah.
you landed in Mexico, I'm just curious because I'm always kind of wondering, did you have like a place to stay? Did you just book like a month long apartment? Like how did that unfold? Did you know? I'm assuming you knew people.
No, I didn't know anyone at all.
Oh wow.
Like I knew no one. I booked a hotel room and then first in Tulum. So I first came to Tulum, then I spent a couple of days in Tulum and I figured, okay, I don't want to live here. It's a bit remote from everything. And actually, like the crowd I was aiming for, Russian speaking people, they would not come to Tulum back in the days, like too far from the airport. So I moved to Playa in 1 week. And then I just found an apartment. I don't even remember how. I guess I just Googled it. Yeah. And Facebook was like a great source of information and connections, and all people back in the days, I don't know if it's still like this, were super helpful. We had like all those chats and groups where you could ask a question and everyone was there to help. And actually, my first cave instructor have helped me a lot because I told him I'm here to stay, and he put me in touch with certain people, like to go through the legal processes and all of this, which was quite generous of him. Honestly, I found that everyone in here was really friendly and welcoming, and whenever I had a question, I would find an answer. Like I would just talk to people and find an answer. I mean, it's been 10 years. Maybe it's not like this anymore, but it used to be like this.
It's actually funny hearing you talk about Tulum being remote. So, in the time that you've been there, I'm sure you've seen it grow quite a bit because it's a busy place these days.
Yeah, it's crazy, honestly. Like I feel old because I go certain places. I'm like, wow, like this cenote looked nothing like it looks now back in the days. And when I say back in the days, it makes me just feel old. I'm like, wow, I have I been around for quite that long? I guess I have.
So you've been in Mexico for 10 years.
I had my break period. I mean, I wrote a whole article about this, which is like on the Protec webpage. I got injured in 2019 while dry cave exploration. So I wasn't able to dive anymore, and I had to move out of Mexico to figure out how to heal and like what to do next. And then COVID hit, obviously, so kind of couple things combined. And afterwards, again by coincidence, I healed my trauma and the COVID ended, and then I got a job offer from Protec, and I joined Protec a couple of years ago.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask about the ProTech route because obviously, ProTech is very well known. It's funny because there was the in depth article, the who's who of side mount, and I definitely
Mm-hmm.
feel when you look at the ProTech roster, it's kind of it's got some pretty big names in there. So, can you tell me about the whole process of getting with ProTech?
I'm afraid people are just gonna hate me for this. Like, that was the most peculiar thing that have ever happened maybe in my whole entire life. Of course, obviously, I knew who Protec was, but I never even suspected that they knew you know what I mean? Like, just a regular girl diving. When I left Mexico, I was a Coven instructor for INTD. I was 2 weeks away from my intro to cave instructor evaluation when I tore my ligaments, so no evaluation happened. And I got my instructor training with one of the well-known people in the area, but also I never considered myself being quote unquote famous in any way, shape, or form. And then I was sitting back home in Europe, and I was dreaming about getting back to Mexico, but I really didn't know how. And I just had those thoughts like back and forth in my head, how I want to cave dive, but I'm ready now, but how can I do this? And then I just got a message from Protec asking like would I consider to join the team. And then we had a conversation a few times over the Zoom meeting or whatever, Skype meeting. We had a few conversations. They explained it to me. And I remember Toro, you probably know Toro, right?
I think so. I know faces. I'm so bad with
Yeah.
names.
Well, anyways, so the manager, he told me like, yeah, you have to think about it. That's a big decision. You have to move back to Mexico and like change your life all over again. Like there is nothing to think about. That's what I want to do. That's what I wanted to do. Like it's just some magic happened. So then I joined Protec, and it's been really wonderful, honestly. Like I have to go through all the instructor evaluation process all over again because I've been an INTD diver and instructor, and Protec is a PSAI facility. But it just adds so much value to the way I dive and the way I teach that it's really next level, and I'm super grateful and happy to be a part of the team. Not to mention that the team is amazing. Like, I don't know if everyone else in the world can say it about the team they work with, but I can truly honestly say, like, for the first time in my whole entire adult life, I am really working with people that, like, every single individual I admire so much and I love so much that I'm just happy to, be in the shop every morning looking at their faces.
That's a wonderful thing to have and experience as well. So if I am like just a diver, I'm headed to Mexico looking to dive. Why ProTech? What are the type of things that are offered there from training to guiding? Tell me, just kind of give me like a brief overview.
Yeah, we are called the Advanced Training Facility because this is where the focus lays. We mainly are focused on training divers starting from like the most recreational, quote unquote, class that we teach would be open water side mount, and then any classes above. And I just think that the quality of education is unmatched, like nothing I've ever experienced before. And now as I'm part of the instructor team and I'm helping like to develop the materials and teaching materials, we can push it even further. And it's kind of awesome to create something that how you want your class to look like in the future. Everyone is like full on, full time doing what we teach. It's one thing to teach from someone who maybe dives once in a while, and it's another thing to learn from Kim or from Skanda. For those of you who don't know, those two people, Kim Davidson and Skanda Caulfield, are maybe, well, Kim has been in the area for decades, and he is like the most admired explorer, educator here, and Skanda recently does tons of exploration. He's probably the most active explorer, or one of the most active explorers in the area. The same goes like for the rebreather, CCR. Everyone just have, I don't know, many people who have as much hours logged cave diving on CCR as some of our instructors do, or like as much hours cave diving as we do have. So we kind of just share this experience and passion and try to build people into very thinking and very self-sufficient divers. You know, I want my student to go out in the big world, like to grow up, to go out and to set an example for everyone else. Like, this is how you should dive, if it makes sense. Maybe a bit
Yeah.
ambitious of me. But I always tell my students, whenever you dive with anyone, I want you to be super confident in yourself and that what you are doing is actually correct.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely amazing because it starts with the instructor, right? The student that goes out is essentially an extension of that instructor. So if you instill good diving skills and good diving morals within that student, then it should show, right? So, no, I think that's absolutely amazing.
I like how people who show up, well, most of our students, they just show up with a different attitude. Maybe because they know, okay, we are now about to be trained by ProTech, like the bar is high, and whenever someone reaches up the bar, it just goes higher. That's that's how it is. Like the bar is always moving, and it's always higher than yesterday. But then they have a great attitude towards training because they don't just come to like go through training and get a plastic card. They come to learn, and that's a big difference.
There's two ProTech facilities, right? One in Playa, one in Tulum.
Yeah, we do have the Playa shop and the Tulum shop. Like equally busy nowadays.
Yeah, I would imagine so. So I stayed right by the Tulum shop. I didn't end up getting over there. I wanted to just pop in, but it's always kind of weird, just popping into a shop during the middle of the day. And then I was like doing some training down there. But it was really cool. I was able to get an interview with Steve and get an interview with Skanda. And actually I sat down, had a couple of beers with Skanda, so it was cool to be able to like meet him and
Yeah.
chat with him. He's super cool, super humble, really nice guy.
That's like the fun part of teaching. Let's say I am teaching in Tulum, and as instructors, we travel. Like I can have a class in Playa or in Tulum, and depends. And then I have like the presentation, and I talk about the development of the side mount or like the history of the side mount, and I show like Kim's invention from back from 2000s, or I talk about the exploration, and then I scan his name pops up. And then one of those guys just passed by the classroom. I'm like, oh, by the way, that's the guy who invented it. Or like gives just another perspective. It's not, someone did it. This person have done it 10 years ago, especially when it comes to side mount, obviously.
I ran into Kim a couple times at dive sites. I don't know if I formally introduced myself, but I reached out to him. Hopefully, I can get him on the podcast. It would be pretty cool to hear his perspective because I know he's been there for a very long time. Like almost, I want to say everybody that I've spoken to from ProTech has a story, or there's some story that starts with Kim because he's been in the Tulum area. I think even
Legend.
before ProTech. Yeah. So
Yeah,
hopefully I can
he's
get
just a
him
legend.
on the podcast. And then actually I wanted to back it up just a little bit. So you were dry caving, exploring caves, you had an injury.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that, because that I know, speaking from past experiences, I used to live in the mountains, a lot of, snowboarding, skiing, which, that could be a life changing injury when someone gets injured. And reading through your article, you were kind of, obviously you're going from training, this was your livelihood, and then got injured and then had to take a step back. Can you tell me about that whole process? Kind of, I guess, a brief summary of your article.
So, yeah, as I mentioned before, I got injured like a couple of weeks before my injury cave instructor evaluation, which was sad. The whole story in and of itself was quite an adventure. Like I can proudly say I was part of Peter Sprouse's expedition, which I don't know if you know, but he is like a big explorer of dry caves. So I first didn't even realize how bad it was. I thought, okay, it's just like torn ligaments, maybe 3 to 4 weeks. The bones are fine. I'm gonna be okay. And then a couple months fast forward into the recovery, I had like a very extensive physiotherapy. I was able to walk and I decided to give it a try and go dive in. And that turned out into a complete disaster. That was like utterly maybe bad decision. I obviously wasn't diving alone. I had like a team, and the team had to get me out of the cave, or like it wasn't even the cave. I made it as far as Cavern Line in Pondy. I don't know if you know, but it's not too far. But I
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
get myself back to the stairs, so I had the guys to help me to get out. So that this is when I realized, okay, I cannot dive, and I don't know when I will be able to dive, or if I will be able to dive, because doctors were not very optimistic. That was like honestly soul crushing. That was maybe the one of the hardest experiences in my life. I had to make a decision to leave everything behind and just to stop diving. And I traveled back to Europe because I realized, okay, if I cannot work, I cannot sustain myself here. This is my like source of income. That's my job. And also, if it never heals, like what am I doing? So I went back to Europe. I had full on maybe a year with like support of family and friends and therapists, and both like psychotherapists and physiotherapists to get me back on track. Because for almost 1 year, I was completely crushed, crying every single day. Like I would come into the room with my diving gear, I would look at my diving gear and burst into tears, which I'm really, I'm happy to share this because I feel when people go through hard times, oftentimes they like sugarcoat and say, oh, I just, went through this. It's hard. It's hard. But then when you actually go through this, nothing can maybe crush you again. Like you've been there, you've done that, makes you stronger. Yeah, and then I recovered step by step. I became a fitness instructor along the way because no one could actually tell me how to work out and how to rebuild myself. So I had to learn it on my own. And I spent like 6 months going to the university, like an academy for this. Well, I've been training for a good 15 years now, but then I got a proper education on that, on nutrition. So I kind of rebuilt myself piece by piece. And then I got a different job. So I also had to learn the weirdest thing ever for me. I worked as a DevOps engineer, which is like coding, which is completely not related to anything that I've done before. I was like sitting home, like, okay, it's COVID. I cannot go out on the streets. I have to find a remote job. And this is like the only job that pops up when, you do your research. So it took me like 5 months of 16 hours a day to learn how to do this, to pass my first job interview. So I got that job, long story short. And then I went to the liveaboard in Egypt and tried to dive. And I had zero expectations. I was like, maybe I just paid for this whole liveaboard and I still cannot dive. Because, like your body doesn't move the same way on the surface, no matter what. Like it's just different muscles and it's different movement. And it's different stress that is put on your ankles and like on your knees. And it went okay. Like I felt fine. So then I went for another liveaboard and I got offered a job there, which was super funny. Like after a couple of weeks, I went for 2 weeks and they asked me if I wanted to stay. And that was tempting, but then I realized I don't know if I can stay on the liveaboard for like half a year. It's not my cup of tea. Also, like maybe it will sound weird. I don't enjoy ocean diving all that much. Like I am a cave girl. Out of 100% of all my dives in my life, maybe 85 would be like cave dives, and the rest is whatever open water dives. Yeah, that didn't feel appealing, but that made me feel that, okay, I can do this again. And shortly after, actually, I got the interaction with ProTech and I got hired. So that was like some way of universe telling me like you can do this. I don't know. A weird circumstances and quite an unexpected chain of events, I would say, in the life.
That's absolutely wild. And that's awesome that you overcame that. I'm just curious, what was I don't want to say diagnosis, that's not the right term, but
The
what
injury?
yeah, what was the actual injury? What, like, did you tear your ACL, MCL? I think those are the only CLs that I know.
Yeah, I tore partially ACLs and ligaments in my ankle as well, and there was some damage done in the knee. I don't even know how it's called in English now. I have to look up in the dictionary. This, yeah, meniscus.
Oh,
That's
okay. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I guess so. There were few injuries kind of combined, and because it happened deep in the dry cave, like it was few hours walking distance from the closest road or like closest village through the jungles. So I had to walk on this injured leg for a few hours, which probably just damaged it further. But like it's hard to tell now. It's now all scars inside. It works. I mean, now I can do just about anything. I can't run, I can't like jump, but other than that, it's fine.
Did you do any swimming for your rehabilitation? Because I know a lot of people will do when they have knee injuries, they'll do some swimming. Like I don't know if it's called swimming therapy, but I know that was like kind of a big thing.
Yeah, just I did a lot of swimming in like Olympic sized swimming pool. I did Aikido, which like Aikido is something I've been doing for years before, and then I came back to it, but then I realized like half a year in that it's a bit too damaging for the knees, like you have a lot of stress on your knees. And I just had a lot of physiotherapy and building muscles around and like training in the gym, Pilates, yoga, all the good stuff. I still do this to this day, like still do it now.
Cool, cool. Well, I'm glad that you're back to it and back in Mexico. That must have been an amazing feeling to be able to land back in Mexico after that whole time being away.
Yeah, that was like coming home, because I don't know, I lived in many places and like countries, but when people would ask me where are you from, I know that like I'm like a Ukrainian, and I also was born in Russia, but my place is like Playa del Carmen. Like this, when I think home, this is what I think of somehow. So when I tell someone, I want to go home, in my mind, it's Playa del Carmen, or maybe the Capes. I don't know. It's weird.
I've actually only been to Playa a few times, usually just very quick. First time I went there, we went from Cozumel, obviously took the boat to Playa and then down into Tulum. And then I went there for lunch while I was there. And every other time was just kind of like driving through. No, and that's another place too. I've heard people have told me about like, oh, 20 years ago, Playa was this little sleepy town. And now it's just like this big metropolis area. And I've heard the same about Tulum as well. I mean, I did not get to Tulum before it was this, I think the first time I visited was it was after COVID, so it was like 21 or 2022 maybe 2021 2022 one of those times, but so it was already pretty big. And then I know now, well, it's actually kind of funny because I thought the train would run through Playa and Tulum, but it actually doesn't, right? It kind of runs, it's a little bit away
It
from the
runs through
town.
the caves. Oh my God. Don't even get me started. That's a topic I maybe should avoid because I do feel strongly about like cave conservation and cave formations and all of that. And just seeing concrete pillars inside the cave system makes me sad.
Especially if to be able to say that like, oh, I used to come here before this was here, it was this beautiful pristine place, and then now you go there and yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to be quite heartbreaking.
Yeah, like I don't know if you know the Nohoch cave system. It's like super famous, and everyone who finishes cave class in here probably makes the first dive through the Park Eternal line. Have you been?
I am so bad with names, and I feel bad because my instructor would probably slap me because I should know this, and I probably have it written down somewhere. But because I went to a bunch of
I
different, and
believe
it's
you
all
have been.
yeah, it's all new, and
Like
everything just looks so cool. I'm just like, let me
it's
do
like
more.
impossible to dive in Mexico for a couple months, and I guarantee you someone took you there one day. So it's one of my favorite places to this day. Like now I like small caves, like I like small side mount passages, but this holds a special place in my heart. I don't know why. Well, maybe I do, but for a few reasons. But anyways, I had a student, and
What are those reasons?
oh, it was the first place, like the first cave dive that I get paid for when I just became like a guide and I took someone to the Nohoch. Then we had a very cool shooting in there with Tom. I don't know if you know Tom St. George, like a great photographer. It just holds a lot of good memories, like diving with nice people and good friends and having cool dives. This is where I learned how to do like jumps properly when I finished my class. So it's just like a very, place that you come back to over and over again. And beside of it, it's beautiful. It's like beautiful passages. There is one line with helictites, which are the formations that grow like defying gravity on the side, while like stalactites and stalagmites would go up and down, and those that grow like on the sides. And it's not many places in the world, I would say, but like in Mexico, you can see this without like going super far into the cave. Yeah, it's just amazing cave. So long story short, I went diving there with a client of mine, and he just finished the class, and we had to call the dive for the first time ever in my 10-year almost experience diving in Mexico because of the bad visibility, because the construction was happening a bit further, and they put some pillars inside, and it just disturbed such a big mass of silt and sediment. And the further we would go, the worse the visibility would become. So we had to call the dive. And that was the first time I've ever felt, oh, I want to look at the ceiling for the cracks. Then in a few months, they cleared out. Now it's all diveable again and kind of back to normal. But I remember, like, when I finished the dive, I was so sad and angry. I was like, whoever did that, that's insane. Like, you couldn't destroy. You can't just do this because it's never gonna form or grow again. This is something that if we destroy, it's gone for good.
That is absolutely sad, especially a place that is so dear to you, to see it just ruined essentially. That's a bummer. So one thing I do like to ask people from Mexico is, do you think that there is a lot more exploration, a lot more caves to be found that have not been found yet in the area that you're in?
There definitely are caves to be found, less so like accessible caves. All the accessible caves are already found, if it makes sense. Like you go through the jungles, you see a hole, you go in, most likely you're gonna see a line with a Bill Phillips's arrow from 80s, which has been there for 30 years or 20 years. But when you go further into the jungles and you go a little bit more, I think there are quite a few caves or cave systems further south from Playa, like Tulum Airport area, that are still under exploration and more to be found that direction. We have like different types of caves, and the caves in that area, there are some cave systems that are quite small, so they're not available or maybe enjoyable for everyone. But also there are some caves in that area that go quite deep. Might be a combination of both, but still, yeah, more to explore. That's the next cool thing to do.
I don't know if I'll ever end up exploring. I'm so new, so it's just so out of my realm of like thinking to be an explorer. So I'm just trying to build up time in the overhead. And I was actually very, very sad to leave Mexico for obvious reasons. It's just amazing place to dive, hung out with amazing people, made some really cool connections there. But I'm very excited to say that as soon as I got back to Malaysia, I emailed. Do you know Robin Cuesta in Indonesia? Do you know who he is?
No, no,
So
sadly.
he's doing a lot of exploration out in the Indonesia area, and from what I've seen and what I've heard, they're really highly decorated caves, very remote, just out in the middle of nowhere. So and he's been there. I actually just saw a post. He's been there for almost 10 years, and I'm trying to line something up to go out there in August, so pretty much next month. So, which is really funny because I thought it would be a little bit longer before I got back into the overhead. So I'm quite excited about going out
Oh,
there
I'm
and checking
excited
it out.
for you.
Yeah.
That should be super cool. I mean, any caves are cool. Dry caves, unexplored caves are 10 times cooler than explored caves.
Yeah, so hopefully I'll be able to experience that at some point. But usually I end off with one question, but I have two last questions that I'll ask you before I let you go. I always like to end the podcast on some sort of advice question. And my first advice question that I would like to ask is, somebody that is moving to a brand new area where they don't know anybody, like you landed in Mexico, didn't really know anybody, you had an idea of what you wanted to do, and somebody that's gone through that, what is the best piece of advice you could give to that person who wants to move somewhere? They don't really know anybody. What is the best piece of advice you could give to them?
Stay calm. Things are not going to go as you planned them to go, but that's okay. Get to know people, follow local rules and regulations, be nice, and just connect, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because my experience shows when you don't ask anything, you don't get anything, right? But when you ask for something and you ask for advice, well, the worst case scenario, you're gonna get a no, but most of the times you're gonna, at the very least, get a nice piece of advice or another connection or something. So don't be shy. Yeah, and like be nice to the world, and world probably is gonna be nice to you, maybe.
My last question for you before I let you go is someone that went through your experience, you had this big injury that set you back, and you persevered through, you came back. There were some tough times. What is the best piece of advice that you could give to that person who just had an injury? They're kind of at that low point. They want to come back. They want to do they want to make their way back. What would be the best piece of advice you would have for that person?
Just accept that you might not be able to, but it doesn't matter that you don't have to try. Take one day at a time, take care of yourself, surround yourself with a good support system, whether it's like friends, family, therapists, any help you can get, just reach out for the help. Don't stay in this on yourself, because it's just not helpful, unless it's like absolutely necessary for your mental health. Take care of your mental health as well as your physical health, because it just goes hand in hand. And yeah, and be patient. Be patient with your body. If you're injured, it's just gonna take time to heal. And I'm a super impatient person myself. Like, I want everything now. But sometimes you just have to wait, and you have to trust. And then if it doesn't go by plan, so be it. Maybe there is another plan for you.
Yes, there's always another plan. There's always something. I love that piece of advice. That's absolutely amazing. Maria, I really, really want to thank you for coming on to the podcast today. This has been wonderful to hear about your journey, to hear about, the things that you've done. So thank you very much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast.